Hello there, and welcome to me explaining to you why time travel does not make sense at all. So, I don't know, I don't have a script or anything, so this is probably gonna be a mess. But I feel like there's like two models for time travel. I'm just gonna hold model one. And so I'm gonna try to explain what I think the idea behind this type of time travel is. This is basically the Harry Potter time travel. It's when you see the effects of the time travel before the time travel happens. Like when Harry Potter sees himself, casts a Patronus to save him, and then goes back in time and is the person casting the Patronus. So in this model, this is basically the, let's just say this is the timeline, right? Ooh. This is the timeline. It just, I keep doing this. It just goes like in this direction. And let's say I'm gonna draw you in blue. So this is you. This is a character on the timeline, and obviously you're just moving along it because you're a creature confined to time and space. But then there's a turning point. This is where we will fuck up our timeline because something happens. Indicate that with a dot here. Your partner, your significant other, is in danger. You see them like on the street and there's a car about to crash into them, or maybe you're in a sci-fi movie, or I don't know, the shooting aliens. They're about to die. But then you see a different version of you existing here alongside both of you. And this version heroically saves your significant other. And obviously you are also still there. You don't go away. And the timeline in itself doesn't stop there either. So it just goes on. But for a short time here, you are here twice. And this version of you is saving your partner, and you are just watching because you're too far away or whatever. So you know that that can only happen with time travel. So we know in order to have saved your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever back there, you still have to go invent a time machine or find one somehow and go back in time to save her. So you do. Like all this time here, this part of the timeline, you were really hard at work inventing that time machine. You invented it at some point, and here at this point, say, wait, I can make this prettier. So at this point, you invent a time machine. Actually, not. This is the point where, technically, where you use the time machine to go back. And you use it. Okay, you use it to go back to this point, obviously. Then you heroically save your partner in the past. And then you go back to the future. And then you can move on here on the timeline. Like you get out of the time machine, you're here, you can move on. You have your happily ever after. The timeline goes on indefinitely. You go on indefinitely. some point you will end, but so that means you have the bad thing never happened. The thing that was prevented by the time travel was prevented by the time travel. Now, I like this model. I especially like this most, like this first, most simplest version of it, because we don't need an alternative timeline. We don't need parallel universes. We don't need anything like that. We just have the one string of events, like you live your life, your partner's in danger, your future self saves them, you invent a time machine, you use the time machine to go back, save them, go to your point in time, and live happily ever after with your partner. The problem with this model is it's kind of it's kind of fragile. So there's a lot of points in which you can fuck this up if you want to, especially, but also maybe if you don't want to. Like, for example, at this point here, your significant other has been saved. They're not in danger anymore. The danger is over. And why would you invent a time machine, travel back? I mean, even if you know intellectually or whatever that that's what you have to do to have made it like that, it makes no sense for you at this point in the timeline, this or that, any point in this timeline, to assume that anything bad is gonna happen to your significant other if you don't do this. I mean, what's gonna happen? Logically, the thing that would happen, I guess, is that if you just decide to not do all of that, like not this, then the timeline, then you would be in a timeline where your significant other died at that moment, and maybe the timeline would kind of change, like right under you. Like maybe if you decide, no, I'm not gonna invent a time machine, I don't need to travel back in time, my significant other is fine, then you'll suddenly be in your universe where they're dead. But you won't have any memory of them ever being saved, because that never happened. And you won't have any memory of thinking that you don't have to go back in time, because they're already saved. Because you didn't think that. Because back then nothing happened, but that your significant other died, and now you're desperately wanting to invent a time machine to go back and save them. But then the second you're here thinking that you need to invent time travel to save them, and obviously in this scenario you have the ability to invent time travel and save them, then that would automatically bring you back to this. Because that would mean that in the future you do that and you save them, and then you do have memories of saving them. So it just doesn't really make sense. I mean, I guess you could make a movie or so where you you just write it so that the viewer can kind of see the timelines change, but the blue guy on this timeline cannot. Because the whole thing about this model 1 is that you don't have any memory of anything that didn't happen at this point, like this simplest version of it. You have, like, you don't remember them dying because they didn't die. they never died. You only remember yourself saving them because that's what you did at that point in time. So, like, I guess it could be like a fun movie concept, and you're basically standing like at this moment in time, and you're thinking, oh, I don't think I need to go back in time, and then whoosh, the whole universe changes. But you don't know. You are suddenly in a universe um where you're actively grieving your loved one and trying to desperately wanting to go back in time. And you have no memory of the other universe, and then because of that, it swishes back to this timeline, and you have the memory of saving them, and you don't feel like it's super necessary to save them now because they are safe at this point. And but like there would be nothing, like I don't know how the story could possibly go on. Like what then? I don't know. So this kind of just rides or dies on you being like you kind of doing your part. Like you gotta actually go back to the exact point and do the exact same thing and then go back to the future. You don't technically have to go back to the future. I mean, you can. There's a variant of this where you just live into this. So like, does this not exist? You just jump back and then you live through all of this, and then you just go on. So it's basically just like a loop. Then you come from here, then you go back. You zoop. That's what actually happens in Harry Potter, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't change anything. So yeah, you not only do you have to go back in time at some point, you also have to go to the exact point where you were before and leave at the exact point that you did and do all of the exact steps in between. Like maybe this version here of you watched that version just say push your significant other away from the car. You could, once you lived through all of this and jump back there, you could easily decide, what if I like pull her this time? Or him, whoever. And like what then? I don't know. I'm again assuming this would just mean that you now have memory of pulling them instead. And you never had the thought of, what if I pull them this time? Because that would not make sense because that's what you watched happen the first time. But again, that would kind of leave us in a position where the timeline just changes back and forth indefinitely. Nothing really happens because then you might think, oh, maybe if I push them this time, and then you're back to the original way of doing things. But then what if I pull them this time? Because you don't never have a memory of the other version, I guess. I don't know if you understand what I mean, but the point is kind of it's confusing because it's not like this thing here really happens multiple times and you need to perfectly replicate the first time and the second time. It doesn't happen twice. It happens once. It happens right there. It's just that you are twice in the timeline, and once you can watch it happen, and then once you have to do it. So I guess in your personal timeline, as this blue person, these events happen twice. And so it's not technically like you have to like it might not be as fragile as it seems, because it's if we're just saying, wow, you have to somehow perfectly redo it, like to the T, you have to move every muscle completely the same, every step has to be the same, then that's very improbable. That would not happen. But it's not what you're trying to do. It's just that whatever you are doing here is just what happened there. Like, if you took a step to the left, that's just how you saw it. The only reason you saw it like that is because you did it like that. But that's just the inherent like problem with time travel, that these events happen twice for you, and only once for like the objective timeline. And that just like breaks everyone's brain a little bit. But I think it's not that big of a problem if you're just willing to accept that this is like, if you're just defining it as unbreakable, as like the author or the creator of this, like whatever you do here is just what you saw there, and if you try to break it, that just means that you saw something different back when it happened, which technically means that every single thing you do there could just change the timeline again, but you would be none the wiser because you are in the story and you don't ever remember anything that didn't happen. And the author or creator, obviously, when they write down the story, they will just write down the timeline that was like that you in the end settled for. A timeline where everything that you did, like the quote unquote second time here, is just what you saw the first time. So like it's fine. One could also argue for like a time god or something, someone who would make sure you stick to what you did, what you saw there. You stick to doing that when you're here. Another kind of problem is you could relatively easily just moving through this timeline in a normal way, like any human would, just like from past to future. We just follow the passage of time. You live your life. You have a significant other. You're very much in love. And wow, something scary happens, but it's okay because your other self is here. And your other self may give you, let's say, a note. I don't know, could be an important thing, could be something as unimportant as just a note saying, yeah, well, you're welcome. They give you that. You keep it all the way through there, all the way through inventing a time machine or whatever you're doing, acquiring otherwise. And then you take it back in time with you, take it all the way to here, and give it to your past self. Closing the loop. That would mean that this note was never canonically written. Or any other item, of course, would also work. Like, it could be a magical sword that was never canonically forged. An incredible invention that was never canonically invented, because it never happens on this timeline. You just get it from your future self, and then you have it because your past self has it. And then you give it to your passer. And of course, this item would only exist very limited time. Like, it can't exist forever. It will, like, let's say your future self gives you the note here, then you carry it all the way to here and give it to your passer. Then obviously the only time where this note exists here. After this point it doesn't exist, and before this point it doesn't exist. But it's still kind of broken, is it not? You could easily kind of fix that by saying that you can only go back in time without any items. Like, you have to be naked, you cannot carry anything. Or when you go back to the future, you take all the items with you, even if they're not in your possession anymore. So, like, you could give the note to your passer here, but then the note would disappear at this point, making it so that it has to be a note that you actually wrote at some point. I'm just gonna put I don't know, something here to indicate that this is the beginning of the time travel. Like, this is the exact point where you travel to. And I made it so that it's a little bit before your significant other is in danger, so that you have time to actually get to them. And now I'm gonna pick out a lovely gray and introduce an alternative timeline. At this point, you can kind of imagine a different version of how things could have gone, right? Like, if the time travel didn't happen, then here your significant other would have died. That's supposed to be a cross. And then you would have gone on to make a time machine out of, like, fueled by the grief, would have built a time machine. Maybe because of the grief, it would also have taken you a little longer to do. But at this point, you would have at least built the time machine completely and decided to go back to save significant other. Now, the thing with this model is, this here is not, like, it's not canon. It's not what happens, and it's not what you would be telling the story if you were the author. Because this never does happen in your story. And at this point, it's not even really an alternative timeline. At this point, it might be just like an aid for you as the writer, imagining how things would have been if the time travel hadn't worked out. And if you had actually had a reason to time travel. Because with this one, you don't really. I talked about how, your significant other is safe. Why would you go back and save them? But also, in this model, there is no way to ever actually change anything that happens. Like, if your significant other died that day, you cannot actually go back and save them. Because if you could, and if you would have, you would have. Like, if that's what you're going to do, then you would remember yourself doing it. Then you would have done it. So that's kind of like a narrative problem, I think, because most people with time travel, they just want that story of something bad happened, but I'm gonna try and work to undo it, prevent it. And that just doesn't really work with this. In Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling kind of made it feel a little like this by having the characters think that the hippogriff thing, I don't know what his name is, Buckbeak? I don't know. And she wrote the golden trio to think that the hippogriff had been executed. So I don't know, that was not the main reason they went back, but it was one of the reasons, maybe, probably, I don't remember. So, you know, they thought they could go back to save the hippogriff, but really the way this works is that the hippogriff never died. So in a lot of ways this works best narratively if you actually can't like witness yourself do this, because like obviously your partner being in danger and your future self saving them could be miles from you, could be unbeknownst to you even. And that kind of makes for better narrative, because then you don't know exactly what they did. You don't have to stress so much about making it align with this, even though either you will fuck it up or you can't fuck it up, depending on how the author writes it, I guess. But then you can also have a version where you think your significant other has died on that day and you go back to save them. But then you realize they were never actually dead because you did save them at that point and they just didn't want to be with you anymore, so they faked their own death. I don't know. Anyway, so this is like, this so far changes nothing about the model or the canon timeline. This is just visual aid, I guess. But you could include it. Like if you wanted to, you could include it in the actual canon events, but not as an actual canon event, because this never happened. But I like the idea of including it as like a memory. So basically you could be, you know, moving along your timeline right there, and then boom, you suddenly have the memory of your significant other dying, being like very heartbroken, receiving let's say magical shield from a unicorn, inventing a time machine, and going back in time, like entering the time machine. And you're like, whoa, what the fuck? But then your girlfriend or boyfriend, I wanted to make this gender neutral, but I'm always thinking of a girlfriend. They always do be needing saving. Egal. Your significant other is actually in danger, and you're like, whoa, fuck, did I just see the future? But you didn't. Another version of you shows up and saves them. And then you realize, oh, that's the future that would have happened if the time travel hadn't happened. So now this does not have to match up this pretty much at all. You don't have to grieve for your significant other because they are alive. You don't have to get a magical shield from a unicorn, and you don't have to take so long to build a time machine because you can kind of remember how it went. So you can build a time machine way quicker than you did in your memory because you can remember how this version of you would have done it. And then you can go back in time and do the thing. And you will have an actual motivation for it. Like, you will know that this is actually what saved your significant other, and you will know that you will feel how important it is to you to do that, to go back in time, save them. Like, it could kind of prevent you going, I think it's not important, maybe I don't have to go back in time, because you can remember how it would be like if you didn't go back in time. This is also like a funny concept because you can, as the narrator of the story, you can kind of explain where things come from, like the magical shield that the unicorn gave you. This is a shield, by the way. You, in this alternative timeline that never happened, you would have taken it with you. So maybe that's the reason why the shield is here. Like, this version of you uses the shield to protect your significant other, gives it to this version of you. And it goes like this, just like it explained before. And it's still a thing that was never given to you in this universe. Never. It might have never been created. Like, it was given to you, but only by you. It wasn't given to you by a unicorn in this universe. You just have it because you have it. But now we can kind of explain where you might have maybe gotten it if you had to get it without time travel. But at this point, obviously, this just looks a lot like a parallel universe. Does it not? It does. It kind of looks like just a different universe that might be canon. Like, if you have the memory of years of things happening that never really happened to you, where is it coming from? And the shield too, like, it didn't come from this universe. If this is not a parallel universe, it came from the time travel. It just came into existence randomly between those points. But wouldn't it make much more sense if this is a parallel universe and there's an actual, canonically, actual magical unicorn shield, and you just took it from that universe temporarily, and that's what's happening here? So I guess let's entertain that idea, because this may cause a lot more problems also. So, like, let's say this is a full alternative universe. This is canonically happening, just not in your universe. And there's real people living on it. Like, there's no reason to say that you are any more real in your universe than this version of you. Wait, I'm gonna give you a different color. You wanna be more green? Okay. Like, here you are. This version of you. Why would it be any less real than you in this? It's not. It's a real person. And has real feelings had a real significant other who's tragically dead, actually met a unicorn, got a shield, actually invented a time machine, and actually went back in time. But like, where? Obviously, normally it would go like this. Like that's what this version of you intends to do, but it can't. That's not possible because this is by definition the universe where the time travel didn't happen. It's not even just that it didn't save your significant other. It never happened. Like otherwise we'd just be in this universe. Or in like technically we'd be kind of in a different model, but we'll get to that later. This is like this is would create a paradoxon, because if you went back to save them and then you actually did save them, or maybe you just watched yourself try, then that would obviously change everything you do in this part of the timeline. Because if you watched yourself try and didn't succeed, then why would you build a time machine if you did succeed? Then this is a completely different timeline where your significant other is alive and you can have, like, you know, all you ever dreamed of: a house, children, a dog. This can't work out. So what has to happen, I think, is that if this is a real parallel universe, you would actually travel back in time to this. And now the question is, where does each of your versions, where do they all go? Like this turquoise version, does it go back here and then cease to exist? Or is it actually the version of you that does the saving? And if so, then what? Does it go back to this future? Or does it tragically go back to this future? You can kind of, like, obviously you can write a story however you want if you're the narrator, if you're the author of it. So you could easily write a story where these are two parallel universes. This person's suffered a great loss, trying to undo it, only manages to undo it for a different parallel universe, for a different version of themselves. Returns to their own future and realizes that what they did was in vain, at least for them. Have to make peace maybe with the fact that, like, maybe it was still a heroic thing to do. Hopefully this blue one is happy about it. But your whole life's work meant nothing for your cause, meant nothing for your own universe. And you just have to, you know, go on like this in your own timeline. Well, that also goes on, because if this is a really parallel universe, why would it just stop? But if you go to this universe, so like remove this tragic storyline and say you go back to this. You've changed universes. I'm just still gonna continue this timeline because it continues regardless. It has to. If it's a real universe, why would it stop? But obviously this version of you could save them, go back to this future. I mean, I don't know why it would go back to this point. Maybe it would go back to this point. I mean, it would probably try to go back to the time it left. But like then what? Because that would mean that this turquoise version just came to this universe, rescued the person, and stayed in this universe, kind of. So for you, the blue version, the actual protagonist, that would mean that, you know, you're living your life, you have a significant other, suddenly a weird version of you shows up and saves your significant other. You're like, wow, that was really helpful. Thank you. You live your life with your significant other. You know, you have, again, if that's what you want, you have like a house and a dog and 3 children, I don't know. And of course, you could think that you have to go back in time and do that, but you don't actually have to go back in time and do that, because the other universe version of you was who did that. So you can just live your life forever, happy, and never do any of the exhausting stuff. You don't have to ever go back and actually save them. And this version will of course be heartbroken or pissed at this point when they realize that now there's 2 of them, and your significant other is more likely to pick you, like to pick the blue version, because this is the version she always knew, or they always knew. Like, this is the version they bought the house with and had the kids with. Why would they leave that for the version who just was there for a short time to save them and now thinks they have any claim on them? They would be like, literally, saw you once. So one thing to kind of like, okay, one alternative version would of course be the turquoise version of you goes back to future, here to the future of your own universe, they replace you. And that's the happy ending that this turquoise person wanted, of course. What they did is they went back in time, they made the good thing happen, and they got to return to a future that was better now. Because now their significant other is alive. Not only that, but also their significant other has memories of making children with them. So they're already super bonded, and they get to be with them forever. And everything worked out, except that the blue version was just like murdered. I don't know what is happening with them. They just, if this is a real parallel universe and this is a real person and this is also a real person and they died, you could make a version where they maybe switch places. Like, maybe at this point, poor blue person teleported here, suddenly has to live in your universe where their significant other is dead. That would also be tragic. That would make for probably an interesting like movie too for some audiences, but that's not really what I want to watch. Like, this turquoise person got everything they ever wanted, but doomed the other version of themselves to the timeline they desperately escaped. It's all very, very deep, I guess, but that's why I think that the making this a real parallel universe is a bad thing. Like, it cannot work out well for everyone involved. So I guess I'm gonna keep Model 1 at, this just being alternative timeline, a a version of events that could have happened but didn't, never happened, nowhere, not canon. What this is, and you are totally happy. So to reiterate, maybe in Model 1, the story just goes, you start here, you live your life, a different version of you pops up, maybe immediately flooding you with memories that never happened, this alternative timeline. One might also, you could probably write it like you unlock these memories as you go, or I don't know, you get them at this point. But I think it's definitely most fun if you get them here. So you get the memories, you see your significant other about to die, but also a version of you saving them. You can live life with actually an advantage because you know a version of the future. You don't know the future, but like I said, you know how to build a time machine now. You might even know some other things that might or might not happen, like just because you remembered happening in this alternative timeline doesn't mean that it has to happen here. But you can definitely, maybe you can even prevent some things, some extra things, just for fun. Like maybe this point here, your aunt died of cancer, so you maybe get a screen here. Hello, Lynn. Hi. I'm back. I took a break because I have a condition where when I try to concentrate on anything for more than an hour, my brain stops working. It's called being sexy. But, I'm back. And what I was trying to say, I don't know what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say is that I like having this thing as a memory, including it as a memory or visions of a future that never happened, will never happen. Not because it fixes anything, it doesn't. It doesn't fix anything really, because any of the problems, because you still can have, a magical shield that you never got from the unicorn. You just have it because you have it. Because this one doesn't canonically happen. And it still is as fragile, paradoxic, I don't know, as always. Like, this thing doesn't change that. And I have explained to you before how I think it's fragile and causes paradoxons easily, but I fear I've not explained it well enough, so I'm gonna try again. So you start here, you have a significant other who you love very much, you suddenly see them getting almost killed, but a different version of you saving them. Then you build a time machine, go back in time, do the saving. But what if, at this point, for example, you decide, no, I don't need to actually finish the time machine. My significant other is safe. Then that automatically means that none of this happens. And that automatically means that you are in this timeline now. Meaning that this is now real and that is not. So basically you have to imagine this now being black and this now being gray. I'm trying to be so coherent, but I feel like I'm failing. What I'm trying to say is, if you're at this point in time, let's make it completely through, decide that you don't want to use the time machine, finish building it, then that will make all of this canon and will make all of this not canon. Because obviously then you could have never seen a version of you saving your significant other because you're not going to do it. So that means that this is canon now. But that means that canonically you saw your significant other die, and because that's the whole setup of the story is that you're apparently a super genius who can invent a time machine and are dedicated enough to your significant other to use it to save them. So that means you do invent a time machine and you do use it. But that automatically means that this is canon and this is not. So every time this one is canon, that automatically means this one is canon. That automatically means this one is not canon. That automatically. But this being canon automatically means that this is canon, which automatically means that this is not canon. Which means that neither of them or both of them kind of are at the same time. We don't know. The story cannot happen. You can, of course, like, kind of, if you... The reason I'm saying that they cannot both be canon, like this being canon automatically means this being not canon, is because I'm saying that there are no parallel universes. They could both be canon in your story, but then that would make, in my mind, both of them parallel universes to each other, which would result in the problems that I discussed before. So if you're trying to just have one of those things be the actual story, what actually happens in your actual timeline, then that just fucks everything up. It just is like you deciding to not go into the past and save your significant other brings just completely destroys the story. There is no way it can go on. Of course, if you don't do that, you don't decide you're not gonna build the time machine, then you're completely fine. Because then you build the time machine and you go back in time and you do the thing and then you go forward in time. And you live happily ever after. Having for a short time possessed a item that does not necessarily otherwise exist in your universe, or it does, but in your universe, the unicorn still has it. The unicorn is on the moon, by the way. I don't know, I'm just making this up. But yeah, that's kind of the problem that I have with this. Like, I hope you can kind of understand. And I want to be clear that the like timeline switching that I'm talking about is not an in-universe event that happens. You can, of course, if you're the author, you can do whatever you want. You can pretend it is. Just like every person who writes time travel just makes shit up and doesn't care if it makes any sense at all. But generally, there's no point in time where just a part of the timeline changes that doesn't make sense. Like, neither in this timeline nor in that timeline there's still like canonical event that the whole reality shifts. I don't know. Again, you could kind of write it like this. Like, you could, of course, write a story where you see your significant other being saved by yourself, but then you don't go back to save them. So then, I scared my bunny doing that. So then the whole timeline changes and you remember how it was before for whatever reason, which makes no sense because you're bound to this timeline. You're not superhuman. You only know what happened. Like, you again, why would your canon be different from what objectively happens in your universe? But like, you could write it like that, of course, that you at this point you have the realization, oh, maybe I don't need to go back and save my significant other, and then you go home and they're not there and your children don't exist and you're like, whoa, what the fuck, did I fuck the whole timeline up? And then you decide, oh, I guess I do need to finish building this and go back. But that would basically be a like not this model. There would be a whole different thing. It would mean that you basically your and would that mean that if you if you lived in a world where all of this does not happen at first, like you live, your significant other dies, you're super sad about it, and at this point of time, let's say, you decide that you can build a time machine, you can save them. Does that mean that it would immediately make this canon? Just the decision to build a time machine in this point in time will have already, you decide you can build a time machine and then you go home and there's your significant other and she's pregnant with your baby. I don't know. That would be wild too. That would be a wild story too. Because at this point, like, then you know that you're gonna succeed. But also, of course, you could maybe fuck something up at that point. Or, I don't know, change your mind. Maybe I won't finish building the time machine. And then, boom, suddenly your significant other's dead again. It would be a wild story, is what I'm saying. So that's kind of, there's definitely problems with this model, and they're not solved by this thing. But I do like this thing, which is what I actually wanted to talk about, why I like it, despite it not fixing anything. I like the concept of you having memories of this thing that never happens, because I just want, I just think it's fun. You can build you can use it to your advantage. You don't know the future, but you do know a version of the future that is inherently wrong. Like, this will never happen, and every single point in time here is a point in time where your significant other is dead, and the world you live in is therefore inherently different than the actual world here. But like, some things will probably still align. So, as I said, you can use these memories to build the time machine way faster, and it seems like a hack, like you pulling the knowledge of how to build a time machine out of thin air. It just, you like, if you remember it really well, then you don't even have to do any research. You can just jump straight to the finished project, and it's like the magical unicorn shield, kind of. You never had to learn that knowledge, you just got it. And I think in this case that's fun. Because it's not like you're technically cheating, because you have, like, I don't know why I'm saying cheating, I guess that's just my idea. Like, you can't be building a time machine without years of research. That's cheating. But you do remember doing all the research. And you do know, like, this only works because you are a person who could invent a time machine on their own. So, like, you're not cheating yourself anything that you couldn't otherwise get. And I think it's kind of even fun that you might have a magical unicorn shield in between these points in time. Just like, it's fun. I don't know. But of course, it doesn't, like, it is also kind of a problem with the model. But like, you can imagine if in this point in time your pet bunny dies because it, like, you left a piece of plastic trash on your floor and then it suffocated. Then you could just prevent it in that timeline. Like, in this timeline, you know to never leave plastic trash on your floor. Or if I think that's what I said last time, if your aunt dies of cancer, or like has maybe even just has to get extensive treatment for it, you could tell her at this point, to get screened, and then the cancer would be detected way earlier. So you could make this timeline even better. And I just think that's great. I don't know, I like wholesome stories, leave me alone. Anyway, the only problem that this actually might solve is if you're the second okay, if your significant other being in danger and the second version of you saving them happened unbeknownst to you. Like in this specific example, that's kind of unrealistic because your significant other would probably tell you, like, wow, a weird version of you showed up with a magical shield and saved me. But it could definitely happen with other, storylines where whatever you do in the past, your future self does in the past, isn't even noticed by your current self. That would mean that would mess this whole thing up, because then you wouldn't know to build or buy, somehow acquire a time machine and go back in time to this exact point. And of course, the author or the time god or whoever could still make you do it. Like maybe the reason for doing that arises at some point here. But maybe it doesn't, because maybe the future version of you solved the thing. Like in this example, where they saved your significant other, the thing is solved. The reason why you go back in time is gone. So if that happened, then you would never know that you need to go back in time and do things. And that would break that model, because again, then you wouldn't, but then you would, but then you wouldn't. So this would solve that, at least, because you would remember suddenly know. Maybe I shouldn't say remember, because for you at this point this is all the future, so you will have a vision of what could have happened, and then oh, probably I needed to go back in time to solve that, so I will. I don't know. Do you think model has two L's? I have no idea. Anyway, I'm gonna try to explain model 2 to you after I manage to. Okay, so in model 2, we start again with a timeline. I'm just gonna make this big from the beginning. But in this timeline, it's not like Harry Potter. It's like most time travel, I think, like that I've seen. I think it's especially like Star Trek time travel, maybe, where things happen to you like they would without time travel, because there's no time travel yet. And let's say at this point in time, your significant other sadly is killed. You invent a time machine, maybe here, and then you use it to go back in time. Maybe I should. Yeah, I'm gonna draw a little line for you again. You just live through all of this. But then you travel back in time. And obviously you're traveling back in time to this timeline, because like if I draw it like this, that would be model 1. So then that would mean that at this point the time travel is already happening, and then your significant other was never dead, and so on, blah blah. You get it, hopefully, maybe not. But my point is, and I find it very clear that you, at this point, you're automatically creating at least an alternate timeline, right? If not a parallel universe. But let's just make it gray first. Like, let's say you travel back to this point in time, and that creates this timeline. I don't know how long to make it. Maybe I'm just... So you're traveling back in time to this point. And yeah, doing the saving. Like in the other model, like technically, even this one, I just left out your little the representation of your other self, but it's here. Obviously, like, you know, the other version of you even gets the shield from Unicorn and so on. So that would also be existing here. Obviously in a different way. But no unicorn shields yet. But this alternate timeline also has an inherent version of you. So then this is the timeline where you exist double for a second to save the girl or guy, them. And then in this version of everything, you travel to this point after. And then the story that the author is telling, the story that the audience is watching or reading or whatever, continues from here. After a job well done, you get to return to the future where your significant other is saved. And then we continue this timeline. We actually do not continue this timeline. And we uncanon all of this. So what I'm saying is, I should have probably drawn this different. That's what I'm saying. Because should I redo it? I think I'm gonna redo it. Okay, so here we are, generally, I think, kind of. Here is the point in time where you actually do save your significant other this time. And obviously, maybe not obviously, but I think most logically this new timeline has its own version of you. But basically I'm saying that now after saving them, you go back to the future, and you do not go back to this thing, because this is not canon anymore, actually. Like, by changing this, you have now made it canon that your significant other did not die that day. So if you go back to the future at this point, you'll end up here. And this whole thing did happen in the story, kind of, because like we're showing it to the viewers, and we're all agreeing that it's something that you actually lived through. But it's not canon in your world anymore. No one but you remembers it. So like now I don't know if I should be using gray for this still, because actually that means that this timeline here is the one that goes on. This one does not. And you know, just so it's a like normal time travel story, like the ones you've probably watched or read, is they always go like this. Like you live through a bad thing, you decide to prevent it, you go back in time to prevent it, you go forward in time to your time, and then you're in a universe where it never happened. So with that could mean you go forward in time, and suddenly in your house there is your significant other and 3 of your children and your dog. So you're like, wow, it worked. They're alive. We have a perfect life. But the thing is, you did not live that life. Like the baby making, the dog buying, it was all done by this person, by Turquoise version of you. And so that's kind of a problem. I think most time travel stories actually make it so that you replace them at this point. Turquoise version stops existing, and you exist here instead. So for your significant other, for your wife, whatever, this looks like, oh, I'm just chilling with my husband, reading a book, and then suddenly my husband is all weird. It's all like, wow, you're alive. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I've been alive. I don't know what you're talking about. And then he like asks you what year it is, and you're like, babe, are you having a stroke? But then he's pretending to be normal again, so you know, you live your happily ever after. This is what normally happens. But it's upsetting, kind of. It's not the perfect story. Because is it not sad for you that you don't have any memory of, you know, buying the house, the dog, all these years, the baby? Isn't it not super weird for your significant other to suddenly be living with someone that they have last actually met like here? This is like before the timeline was changed. And this is a problem that can actually be solved relatively well with just giving you the memories. So you could wake up at this point in the future. Not like wake up, you use your time machine to travel to this point in the future, and you step out of your time machine and you suddenly remember. You remember all these years of, you remember actually here watching yourself save your significant other. You remember all the years after that where you could, be happy and buy a dog. And that makes it significantly less creepy, I think. But it's still kind of weird that you would just like replace turquoise version. I mean, to how far does it go? If you, in the process of inventing your time machine, like somewhere here, if you lose a finger, travel back in time, do you immediately have your finger? Or are you missing a finger for all of this? And then if you go forward in time, do you then suddenly have your finger again? Step out of the time machine and have your finger again? I think how most stories do it, they do the physical time traveling here, the two versions of you. But then when you go back to the future, they make you not actually your physical body traveling, but instead just like your soul. So your soul gets transferred into the body of the turquoise version of you. And that's why you might have their memories and you can resume their life. And you have all your fingers because you're in their body now. And you don't have the problem either of, if you build a time machine here, and presumably maybe the time machine comes with you to here. Like if it's a physical machine, it would appear here and you would get out of it, and then you would go back into it, and then it would have to suddenly appear in the living room of your house in the future and probably completely freak out your significant other. So that's kind of the problem with that, because that doesn't make sense to me at all if you change in between if the body or the time machine comes with you. There's a different, maybe it would be model 3. It would be just if you time traveled only your soul. Like there's never two versions of you. There's only, you can just override the soul of your previous version. I'm gonna maybe explain that later. But with this one, I think this person is the same as these continue to, it's not that this timeline doesn't have a beginning, it has the same beginning. I should probably technically to do like this kind of, because this is now the canonical version of events. This part is the same. Maybe, whatever. That basically results in the whole universe except for you. Your significant other, your kids, your dog, your friends, your mother, your aunt, who may or may not die of cancer, For all of them, this is the timeline. For all of them, they are living in a world, in a story where your significant other was saved in that moment by a weird version of you. And you had a happily ever after, and there was absolutely no time traveling ever in this timeline. Because you don't have to ever time travel. Like this version of you, why would they? So you just have a different canon, like something that canonically happened. Your canonical timeline is just different from anybody else's. Not just in the way that obviously all of our timelines are different, because we're all different, doing different things. Like my story is different than yours. No, I mean, all of our stories normally happen in the same universe and are, objectively true. Versus this whole thing happened to you. It's actually the only reason that your significant other is alive. But it's nowhere to be found in your timeline. It's not. It didn't actually happen. It couldn't have. Not to anyone else. And I think that's why I like Model 1 better than Model 2. Because now with Model 2, you inherently have two different versions of the same event being canon at the same time. Which I specifically excluded in Model 1. Like, I specifically said that is not possible. But in Model 2, that's kind of inherently what is happening. Only that this thing is only true for you. Like in this model, because this is not the thing where you only travel with your mind. This is, there's a different version of you here. You travel with your body. That means that in this model, you might actually, at this point, suddenly be losing a finger that you obviously did lose in your timeline, because otherwise why would it be missing? But that never happened in the timeline that literally anybody else exists in. But also, if I'm not doing the just mind time travel thing, I still feel like your other version would still exist. Like, why would you just replace them if you're actually time traveling with your whole body and not your mind? So that would probably mean that there's just two of you now. Would it not? There's just two of you now from this point forward. And your significant other, again, is probably gonna stick with this version, with the turquoise version. Because that's who they made the babies with. I'm simplifying, I'm trying to be comedic. Obviously, you don't have to have the babies. But that's the person that they share the timeline with. That's the person that your significant other shared this whole thing and later this thing, however long it goes, with. versus you were just here for a moment, and then like are suddenly like, you should be with me, I saved you. Your significant other would probably be like, I barely know you. Like, get out my house. And it's obviously weird because you would have cloned yourself. Now, all of this might sound familiar. It's actually like the models aren't that different. The main difference is like what's the story that you're telling the audience? Is it the like quote unquote corrected timeline, the one that you changed by time traveling? Or is it the one that would have been if there hadn't been any time traveling? And then because the story that you're showing your audience is at least assumed to be canon in some way, that means that in Model 2, the alternate reality, the alternate timeline where the bad things happen, is automatically more, like, feels at least more canon than here. It has to be 2, because like, I don't think you can really argue that this part is just like a different version that could have been, you know, like this part is, because this is absolutely important for the whole story to work. This is where the time traveling happens. So in some way, I guess the main difference is that the person who lives through this, who does this, the person doing this here in Model 2 is the person from the timeline that ends up being not the official timeline. Let's just say that. And in this version, it is the person who is in the official timeline. Like, I could blend Model 1 and Model 2 together if I said that, you know, this person in this reality is the one to jump here and do this. Then go here, maybe replace this person, or exist parallel to them. That's way, like, that's way closer to Model 2, because it's a person from the other universe, but obviously that wouldn't be really here. This is not Model 1 really anymore, because it's like an important part of Model 1 that the person who does the time traveling is the person who's in the official timeline. Versus it is an important part of this model that the person doing the time travel is part of the non-official timeline. A timeline that has to be changed, corrected. Like, of course I could, you know, do a similar thing here too. I could just say, well, maybe this person actually jumps back and does this. Jumps back again here. And then you have basically Model 1. Let's say, you know, this thing becomes uncanon. This blue version stops existing at this point. And then we have Model 1. Anyway, I hope you can kind of understand what I'm talking about. Maybe you cannot. But you know, it's fine. Here too, of course, you could theoretically. Oh, I think here's even even wilder too, because if you, in this timeline, if you get the magical shield here, then you can actually have it, not only, you know, you have it all the way here, you would also, and all the way here, you would also be able to take it to this future and have it forever. And just have the, you know, the magical shield in your timeline forever. And have an item that in this timeline was never given to you by the unicorn. You have duplicated this one too. Like, you, just like there's two versions of you now, there could now be two versions of this shield. Because if the unicorn handed it to you in this timeline, that means that in this timeline, the unicorn still has it. Because it has not handed it to you in this world. So that means there's two magical shields now. One that the unicorn has, maybe handing over to somebody else who might need it, and one that you have. Again, could probably be fixed by just saying you can't take anything with you. And the easiest way to do that, of course, is by the mind traveling thing. Which let's just kind of explore the mind traveling. Mind traveling. Now that's ugly, but it's fine. Okay, so version 1. You have a timeline. You are the person on this timeline. You get suddenly replaced with a different version of you for a short time. Because this is the time where, you know, your significant other has to be saved. This obviously is where the time traveling happens. Then you are probably back to being yourself again, normal self. And then at this point, like I would have to probably this should kind of be like a gradient. You're changing, growing as a person, doing all the things, inventing a time machine. You're getting closer and closer to the turquoise version of you. And then you time travel to here. You do this, time travel back. And that's that. I don't think too much changes for this one. Obviously, what changes is that you don't see a different version of you doing this. You just might have amnesia about what happens here, or you can actually remember it. Which I think that would be a problem, because then you would remember doing something that you have to do. So, your personal future. So, I think in this version you would, you know, have no memory of this thing happening until you know, until this point in time. then, and if you have lived through this, you obviously will remember it. But that means, like, the story, the official story is you're a person, you are in love, you wake up one day later and realize that you are missing all the memory of this part, but your significant other tells you that you were there and you saved them. You're like, what? How can I not remember saving you? You figure out how you can not remember saving them because it wasn't you, it was future you. So then you build a time machine and then you use it to go back in time. You do that forward in time, live happily ever after. It doesn't have the magical shield problem anymore because you cannot carry any items through time. You're just your mind in that body. It does still have the other problem though, I think, because you could still at some point here decide that you're not going to go back in the future, save them, and then mess up the whole thing. But so that's that. Version 2. You have a timeline. You are a person. Timeline. I'm honestly just winging it at this point. I'm not sure how this actually goes. This is the point where your significant other needs saving. This is the point where the time traveling happens. It's the other point where time travel happens. You are time traveling to here. And then here you save your girlfriend in this version of reality that is the realer version, the more real version, or anyone but you. And then you go to the future, and in between a different version of you exists, but you replace them again here. The turquoise version of you has never lived through any of this, so they're different than the blue version. However, the person here before that is basically equally turquoise and blue. Like, this is before the two versions of you split, so it means that that's the history you share. Here is just that the blue version is basically just the future version of you, which means that the turquoise version is the future version of you, which means that the blue, slowly turns into the turquoise, and then the turquoise travels back, and that's why that's bits turquoise. Well, versus in this, they are just, the blue version is just the version of you that lived through the death of your significant other, and the turquoise version is the one who didn't. the one who was suddenly possessed and able to save their significant other. So I think that is an improvement to the Model 2. Because now at least you don't have two versions of you. And you don't have the problem with the magical shield. I mean, it's also kind of boring that you can't have a magical shield. But, you know, you can't take anything with you while you time travel. And the problem still kind of exists that this story is not canon for anyone but you. It's not what actually happens in this universe. Like, for, you know, again, from the perspective of your significant other, your boss, your parents, whoever. All that happens is, you know, this part, and this whole part, and then this thing, and then everything after that. So that means that you just it's confusing for your wife, because at this point suddenly she's with a way more traumatized version of you. Like, one who has watched you die, potentially. Like, not you, her. You know? You know what I mean. Do you know? Does anybody know what I mean? Anyway, for time travel stories, I think my, like, favorite versions is probably this one, like the mind travel with version 2. Or the Model 1 with the body travel. With or without having the memory of this one. I don't really care. I think anything else makes no sense at all, really. And as I've explained, even my two favorites are like don't really make sense. Not really. So now I can finally properly complain about different stories. Because as I said, Model 1's Harry Potter, basically. Except that in Harry Potter, as I already said, this goes on. And not this. Like, they do a full loop. But it doesn't really matter. And I like that about Harry Potter. And I think within the original Harry Potter books, it's pretty consistent. So that's one of my, I guess, kind of favorite time travel stories. Because that's just how the time turner works for basically all of Harry Potter. Hermione uses it mostly to be in several places at once for studying. Like, the lore is that she wanted to be in every course. Is it called a course? Every, I don't know, different lesson that she could. And some of them are in the same time slot. So someone, McGonagall maybe, Dumbledore, gave her the time turner show so she could achieve that. And obviously the story where they use the time turner for something else, it still works exactly like that. So but that's why I don't like the new book. I don't know what it is, a screenplay, musical, whatever. Because I'm pretty sure they used the time turner to actually change something that was definitely different before. And that is just not Model 1 anymore. So they change completely how the time turner works. And I'm mad about it. I haven't read it, so I'm not sure. But I'm still mad about it. Just in case. I don't know. And kind of similarly, there's I think it's a German book series. Should I Google that? I'm gonna Google it. Ah, yes, it is German. And there's a whole section for mistakes. Well, I guess it's just a very small section. But yeah, that's exactly what I mean, honestly. That's exactly what I was talking about. Because most of the Liebe geht durch alle Zeiten Bücher, books, it's basically Model 1 time travel. But then randomly, some things are actually, more like Model 2, where she can actually change something that was definitely different before. So that's just inconsistent, and I don't like it. Model 2 is actually funny because I don't think anyone, now that I think about it, probably there's no piece of media now that actually uses this, mainly because of this problem here. I think. You gotta mix it, at least, with a mind traveling thing. Because otherwise you just have two versions of your character forever, and nobody wants that. And I thought this was kind of what Star Trek does, because Star Trek, they definitely worry always when they go back in time about changing the timeline. So the characters definitely think that they could be changing something. Versus in Model 1, if you knew how time travel worked as a character in this thing, you would know that you can't accidentally change something that suddenly causes the fourth world war to have happened or whatever, because everything you're doing is already worked into your timeline in the past. Versus so with this you could accidentally make yourself never be born. If you traveled before you were born, you could accidentally, which is Star Trek, funnily enough, they almost never time travel too specifically to prevent something, or even on purpose at all. They normally lead time travel completely by accident, I think. And they normally time travel to a place in time long before they were born. So Star Trek time travel is kind of like, we have a timeline here, and this is, let's say, when you were born and you live until there, then you get accidentally time traveled into the past. Here well, I guess I have to draw this on another timeline, because you can actually change something with it, so, or at least they think you can, which I don't think it's ever really confirmed, though. They could be living in a Model 1 time travel universe, and they just wouldn't know. But they kind of think that they are now creating a different timeline where, they were there for a short period of time. And then they travel here. And then I think they have to replace that version of themselves. So that it basically goes like this. That's too wonky, I can do better. Because in Star Trek they do worry that, they might talk to the wrong person at this point in time. Just like maybe ask them for directions, and that means they're 3 minutes later than they would have been in this timeline. And that means they don't get hit by a car. But that means they give birth to second Hitler. And so in this timeline, there's suddenly war. There's suddenly like the Fourth World War happening right here. And you travel forward in time, you're suddenly in a world where the Fourth World War happened. And that's not good. So that's why Star Trek people always try really, really hard to don't do anything. Just don't do the normal amount of things. I don't know. Just try to not change anything about how this would have happened if they weren't here. But again, I don't know if that actually ever happens in Star Trek. I think they always worry about it. But then they never change anything. Like they normally, I think, succeed in not changing anything important. So then when they travel back and technically replace this version of them, it doesn't really matter because this version is almost exactly the same as they themselves, because the whole timeline here, this whole thing is like almost exactly the same as this whole thing, I think. And I think this here might be X-Men time travel. Not sure. This one I think I've never seen anywhere. Now Marvel time travel, I think, is a whole like different ordeal. I think Marvel time travel is a version of this where they acknowledge that you can't or shouldn't stay in this universe. So like first, I guess I didn't, like with Model 1, I had a whole thing about what if this was genuinely a parallel universe that goes on forever. With Model 2, I guess I didn't do that. But obviously you could. And it's kind of, I think, what Marvel does. Like, what if this universe went on and on? And Marvel kind of acknowledges that it doesn't super make sense to go to this future and live here forever in this parallel universe that isn't yours. So instead, I think, I have not watched Infinity War or Endgame. I've just watched some shorts. So now I think I know what happens. No, I have no idea really what happens, but what I'm guessing, kind of from the shorts, is that they go like this to their own universe, and what they did here did not change their universe. It only changed this other universe that we don't care about, apparently. Like, I've seen a short where Ant-Man is like, what if we go back in time and take the stones? So then Thanos can't get them because we have teleported them to the future or destroyed them. Okay, quick little interlude to better explain what I think Ant-Man wants to do. Because I think Ant-Man basically wants to do like the Model 2 thing. I'm realizing I should probably draw that slightly differently to explain this. I'm just gonna remove both of those timeline beginnings to better indicate to you that they this is basically a part of the timeline that they both share. So I'm just gonna draw in the middle. Because basically this is before the parallel universes even separated, basically. They are separating specifically because you're time traveling. And then the only one of those timelines actually continue. So this is now the, I don't know, the simplest version of Model 2 and what I think that Ant-Man wants to do and what I think that most people want to do. Like, if you imagine going back to the past to change something, that's probably how you imagine it, mostly, at least. Because you start here very normally with just how the story works is one timeline and it's moving forward. And then something bad happens, your significant other dies, and you build a time machine and you go back in time. And then you basically, by going back in time, that's what splits these two versions, timelines, even. That's what creates this other version. So in this other version, you will be here to save the day, and then you will go forward in time to the timeline you now created where everything is better. I mean, if you succeed, at least. And obviously that's not quite what you're probably imagining and what Ant-Man is imagining, because what most people would be imagining is that at this point you replace the other version of you. So for whatever reason, you time travel here, normally imagine doing that with your body. Like, you can see the younger version of you, you can spy on them, you have to maybe avoid them, something along those lines. And then when you go forward, you are just transported into the body of this person, this turquoise person. And that is what Ant-Man wants to do. He wants to, here's the snap. Thanos snaps everyone away. So now he has kind of built a time machine, Ant-Man, I mean, and wants to use it to go back to before the snap, prevent the snap. In his case, he would prevent it without ever being at the scene of it. So like, he just travel until here, maybe. travel forward with the stones or having destroyed the stones or whatever, and be in a world where the snap never happened. And obviously he doesn't imagine himself being randomly cloned at the end of it, so he probably imagines that there's a version of him who has been with his girlfriend and his daughter all of this way, and he gets to just become that version of him. But Banner tells him that's not how it works. In this multiverse, you cannot change anything that has happened. And Banner says, no, we can steal the stones from the other universes. We can, go here, steal a stone here, go back and have the stone. But it wouldn't be our past. It wouldn't be the past of our universe. It wouldn't change the snap. So I think they just kind of do this, and then they just undo the snap the old-fashioned way, without, like, not traveling back to preventing it ever happening, but instead snapping again, so that now it's reversed. But this. That's why there's like 5 years between the snap and the unsnap in the timeline canonically. So basically they would be like unsnapping the people here, and then they would go back here and bring them back. Stones go back here. So they've basically just borrowed the stones from a different universe and different time. Obviously, Marvel isn't any more consistent in the time traveling than anyone else. If anything, they're less consistent with it. Especially since Steve works differently, apparently. Because Steve goes back and apparently to a different universe to return the stones, and stays there, but does not actually stay in a different universe. So that means what Cap is doing, let's just say the blue line is Cap, Captain America, Steve, my guy. Let's just say he goes here to return the stones, like where after the end snap, he returns the stones here. Does he just, like, I don't know, drift parallel universes to here? Because that's just kind of what it looks like. Because then he can live through all of this time and, show up here with as an old man. Do you know what I mean? Because it's implied that he just stayed in the past, but in the past of this universe, actually, and just lived in it happily ever after with Peggy, and until she was dead and he was old, and then he was like, oh, I think it's time to go to the park where my younger version of me leaves to never return, so that I can then explain to Bucky and Sam what happened. But that would mean, obviously, that throughout this time here, there's two Caps. Like, obviously, here's the obviously here's the blue line of the young Steve, who does all the Captain America things for all of this time, since forever. And here's the old Steve. Like, I guess not super old, growing old here. Which would then mean that the old Steve has been there for everything. Like the first Avenger movie, the Iron Man movies, the first Captain America movies, they all play in this time frame. I mean, the first Captain America movie also plays kind of before that, but that means probably canonically that old Steve was just chilling, sitting back, having tea with Peggy until she died, while all the other shit was going on. Like while young Captain America was battling Iron Man, Steve was just like, I remember being that guy. I don't know. What is he thinking? And I think it's especially funny because he chooses not to change anything. Then, like he could have brought himself out of the ice earlier. He could have. Hello there. Welcome back to Ramblings of a Mad Woman. I took another break. But yeah, I feel like I mean, I could be done. I have explained to you, like, I don't know if you can even call it explaining if I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, but I still kind of want to explore what happens to Steve in the MCU, in the Marvel Universe, multiverse. Because, okay, timeline, right? And this is Steve now. At some point, Steve is born, let's say here. And then Steve, lives his life. He's a baby, then he's a child, then he's a man who, for some reason, wants to be a soldier very badly. Then let's say he becomes super soldier. This is where he gets his shield. Is there a little star on the shield? I don't know. I can't draw a shield that small. And then he, is Captain America for a while, and then he freezes. So then, I guess I'm gonna do here like dots, because in this time frame he does exist. He's not like dead, but he's in the ice, and so he doesn't do anything. He doesn't age. But then let's say here's the point where he gets taken out of the ice, and then there's all the Marvel movies, basically, all the other Avengers movies, Civil War, all the movies that he's part of. Then let's say at this point here is a snap. I don't know how to indicate that. I don't know. And he lives through the snap, right? So he's just kind of unbothered by it. And then in this time frame here between This is where a lot of time travel happens. I mean, I don't know, I think I'm gonna indicate this like that. We don't know what the fuck's happening with this timeline here. But here is the anti-snap. Is where we unsnap everything. And he lives through that too. And then here is the point where he decides to go back in time. Like, he goes back in time to the other universes to return the stones, but he also stays there. But then, like, Old Man Steve is here, I guess, appearing right after our Steve left. So how does that work? Let's just make a parallel universe. Say here. This parallel universe has its own Steve, of course, who, you know, gets born at the same point and then goes into the ice at the same point. And then is in the ice. It's out of the ice. And I guess we don't know what happens here. So I think Steve at this point, first he has to go to this parallel universe, like some point here. Or maybe at some point here. And return the stones. And then what he should have done, what they expected him to do, is just go back. Just like, you know, return the stones here and go back to his universe in his time. But he didn't do that. So, like, what did he do? Did he you know, travel to this universe here, return the stones, and then just travel parallel universes and not time, and live through all of this? And then, you know, he's this guy. And if so, like, why is he allowed to do that? Ant-Man was, you know, Ant-Man was trying to change their actual universe, but was told he can't. That's not how it works. But Cap can? Because this now is a different timeline. This is a different timeline where there's two Steves. All, like, in this whole time. And it's also, like, it's pretty upsetting for Steve, I think. Because he appears somewhere here. I mean, I assume he wants to be with Peggy be happy this time around, I don't know. But that would mean that in all of this timeline, old man Steve here, should I make him a different color? I'm gonna make him a different color. Like maybe he can be green, I don't know. So this here is old man Steve actually, and here I'm gonna, I'm just gonna pretend that this is the point where young Steve becomes old Steve, which obviously that would be like a slower process, but for hopefully clarity, kind of. I'm just gonna go like this, and okay. Maybe to make it a little bit clearer that, of course, Steve just doesn't transform at this point. Doesn't just transform. Like, they're the same person, obviously, just green one is older. But what I was trying to say is that Green Steve here is living a pretty upsetting life. He can't really tell Peggy that normal Blue Steve is in the ice. But then he has to lie to her completely. Like, he's probably like, she's like, Steve, you're back. Where have you been? I've missed you so much. And he's like, can't tell. Because, I mean, I guess he could say, oh, I've been stuck in the ice, but I got out on my own. But then I think people would investigate that. Sark would maybe try to get back his plane or what that was. And he also can't tell the truth, because if he told her, well, I'm future Steve. The Steve you're looking for is currently frozen. I don't think Peggy would just accept that. I think Peggy would be like, okay, let's unfreeze him. Like, what are we waiting for? And then Steve would be like, no, but we have to preserve the timeline. And she's like, that sounds like a you problem. Because everything you're talking about is just the future. And, for everyone, like, it doesn't really make sense to tell anyone, well, I know the future and you have to make sure that it happens exactly how I know it. Like, no, I don't. The very point of life is that we can change the future. So I'm gonna do what I want. I don't know. Anyway, so he can't unfreeze himself. He can't really be honest with Peggy. Most importantly, he can't save Bucky. If he don't you think it would absolutely kill Steve Rogers to be in this point in time and know that currently Bucky's being tortured and turned into a super soldier, and he can't do anything about it? That sounds miserable. And then, he can't even console old Steve, young Steve, Blue Steve, when he wakes up. Because Blue Steve is really, really sad that he can't be with Peggy. So like, wouldn't Green Steve be so tempted to tell Blue Steve, it's gonna be okay, you're gonna be with her all this time? But no, Blue Steve has to be heartbroken and kiss Peggy's knees for some reason and do all of that stuff, while Green Steve has to stay out of everything. I mean, it could be a little bit comedic, maybe he's like, like when you're sick at home and you sometimes look at the clock and be like, oh, they would be like in a math lesson right now. If I was in school, then now would be lunch break. Maybe Green Steve could be kind of like that, like look at his calendar and be like, oh wow, right now Blue Steve is like beating up Iron Man. That was a good time in my life. I don't know. But I think generally it's not the happy end that the writers actually wanted for Steve. Is it? I mean, if he somehow convinces Peggy to be with him, and like maybe he convinces her that she can never tell anyone that he's back. Like maybe he's just like, I don't want to be Captain America anymore. I want to settle down. I don't want anyone to know that I'm alive. And Peggy's like, okay, I'm gonna have a secret boyfriend. Why not? For like 70 years, I'm gonna have a secret boyfriend. It's fine. Then it would still be weird when Blue Steve suddenly shows up at her deathbed. I don't know. I don't remember when he meets her, but there is a scene in the movies where, normal Steve, Blue Steve, visits Peggy. Peggy is old, and he's kind of like, well, I completely missed our date. I'm sorry. And I don't know, does that mean that Peggy is totally like in on it? Like maybe Green Steve was just there and was like, oh shit, I gotta hide. Blue Steve is coming soon. And then Peggy's like, oh yes, it's so sad that we never got our chance. And secretly is like, we've been dating for the last 70 years. I don't know. But anyway, it doesn't really seem like the happy end that we wanted for Steve, does it? So I would like to propose a different possibility. What if, that doesn't happen like this? Maybe instead what happens is that, our Steve is moving here, turning into Green Steve, or so that you know what I'm talking about. And brings back the stone here and just stays in this universe. So Green Steve just lives here and then he just decides to hop back here. Now this version is funnier, I think. It's less tragic, even though it's still tragic. It's less tragic, I think, because he doesn't have to kind of preserve the timeline that he's used to. This is a different universe. He can do whatever. Like, nobody. Who says that in this universe, too, Bucky has to be tortured, turned into an assassin, kill Tony Stark's father, be super traumatized. Steve has to be in the ice for 70 years. Why? The truth is, none of this has to happen here. Because this is not Green Steve's past. Green Steve's past is this universe. So now here he can really change things. And he can really do his, have his do-over that he wanted. Have his happy story that the writers, I think, wanted for him when they decided he would stay in the past. Like, there's still problems because still, again, if you tell Peggy what's going on, then she will want to unfreeze this Steve. And then you are two Steves and one Peggy, so that doesn't really match up. But I think it could be a comedy series, honestly. I think it could be funny. Because, okay, Peggy says we unfreeze Steve. Why would he not? We have two Steves here at the same time. Turquoise Steve, of course, gets together with Peggy because that's her universe Steve. But maybe she can be with both of them? That sounds unhinged, but like, okay, genuine question. If you were just living your life, and then your significant other shows up, looking maybe like a little bit older, maybe, and it's like, hi, I'm from a parallel universe. I'm not your person, but I would like to stay here because in my parallel universe, I cannot change anything that happens from this point out. I can only, if I went back, I could only go back to the whatever century this is. And I can still go back there whenever. Like, he could, obviously, he could be in this universe for just until this point and then go there or whenever. But if your significant other tells you, my timeline, my universe wasn't great and I will maybe return to it, but I'm kind of like done with it. I feel like the story has had a pretty good ending, and I just wanna redo life from this time on with you. Would you agree to dating both versions at the same time? Like, I don't think many people would change their, who they're dating. They wouldn't go, like, Peggy wouldn't go from dating Turquoise Steve to dating Blue Steve. Why would she dump Turquoise Steve for Green Steve? But you can have both. Like, I don't even know if that would count as polyamorous if, like, it's both the same person, kind of. And, like, genetically, I guess you could also argue that they're, like, identical twins, but they're not. It's probably fine. Anyway, maybe that's too weird. Maybe he couldn't be dating Peggy. But I don't know, he could still be around. Like, maybe they're just friends now. And he can be like something of a fairy godmother to this whole timeline. Because he can unfreeze Steve. He can save Bucky this time. He can tell Howard Stark to tell his son that he's proud of him. He will, obviously, by saving Bucky, prevent Howard Stark from being assassinated. I mean, not necessarily, because they might make a different assassin, but I feel like with two Captain Americas around, we can definitely avoid that. We can give Tony Stark a happier childhood. And then, of course, it will be a little bit weird because Turquoise Steve will now be about 70 years older in any point in time than Blue Steve was in his universe. So, through all of the events of the other Marvel movies, Turquoise Steve here would be pretty old already. So, like, would the Avengers exist without Steve here? Because Green Steve is even older than Turquoise Steve. Because he has not only all of this, but also all of this already behind him at this point. But yeah, I think it would be kind of funny series, maybe, where maybe they're trying to figure out who could be the next Captain America in this parallel universe. Because they're both growing old now. So they're like, probably Peggy's like, no, I will not raise my child to be a superhero. That seems unethical. But I'm sure someone will be there who they can give Turquoise Steve's shield to at some point. I also like it because the Agent Carter series, which is, I think, the best Marvel series there is. You should watch it. I don't know. I don't care. It's a little bit weird because maybe the events of the series would not even be canonically happening in our canonical parallel universe that the movies are always following if Steve were to travel back in his own universe. Because in the series, Peggy Carter is always heartbroken that Steve is gone and having to save the world without him. And if he were actually going back in this parallel universe and revealing himself to her, having a relationship with her, I think the series cannot happen anymore. You could argue that it's like after the series, because the series only has like 2 seasons, so I guess he can be frozen in the ice for 2 seasons and then the real Steve would appear. But I think it's definitely funnier to make it in this parallel universe that now the events of the series will definitely not happen. But there could be funnier shit happening instead. Like, imagine the series, the Agent Carter series, but now we have two Steves. Anyway, that's my unhinged pitch for a series. But of course, I get that most people wouldn't really like that. I don't. I mean, I definitely see the problem with it. Because you're still not really giving Steve the happy ending, the happy life, the happy beginning, I don't know, that you wanted. Because you're not united. reuniting him with his Peggy. Kind of from his perspective, you actually do, because like, ignoring these shenanigans for now, if he travels to this point in time, that would mean that up until this point, these universes are identical. So he's meeting up with literally the Peggy he knew. Like, there's no difference between the Peggy here in this timeline and the Peggy here in this timeline. There's also no difference between the, the blue Steve and the turquoise Steve until here. So, like, from his perspective, it's the Peggy he knew, but also he kind of, like, he has in the back of his mind that there's also the universe he actually belongs to, and in that universe he has left Peggy alone accidentally, did not come to the date as he promised, left her to, be a badass agent all by herself. And like, can he, same with Bucky, like, he can save the Bucky here, this timeline's, this parallel universe's Bucky, but wouldn't he still be sad that he can't save this one? I mean, I think it's okay, because again, in his perspective, this is all in the past. He has been sad about not saving Bucky, like, for a long time here. He was probably like, shit, I should have looked for him better immediately. Why did I crash into the ice? That was, he probably already feels super guilty about not saving Bucky here, but he must have made his peace with it somehow. Like, he was in the ice, he couldn't have saved him. And Bucky turned out alright, kind of. So maybe he can take this perspective all the way to here, be like, even though I am in the past technically, this is all set in stone and in the past for me. So my universe's Bucky is happy, has new friends, has been saved eventually. Anyway, I have no idea how old Steve really can get. Like, does he have a normal lifespan? Does he have an extra long lifespan? Because obviously he has to travel back here before he dies. Like, maybe he's like, I can kind of feel that I'm dying, so I should. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't at this point. Maybe it is at this point. He's like old and decides that he has to travel back. Because he still wants to see his Bucky, his Sam, all of his friends before he dies. Maybe Peggy actually dies before that. Then it would be like sad, but makes sense. He has had his redeemed storyline. He has been with Peggy until she died. Which canonically she does, like, about at this point, right? Because pretty soon after Steve gets out of the ice, old woman Peggy dies. So she would die in this universe too. So I guess he doesn't really have any reason to stay beyond that. So maybe he would actually, at this point, already go back. But yeah, it's unhinged. It's not good. It's never good. The I don't think there's any like good storyline for Steve. Like actually good storyline for Steve. I don't know. Okay, I think that's kind of all I have to say. And I think we're all tired of hearing me talk, so I'm just gonna say bye. Tschüssi.